Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dhanush channel. So we are going to continue the economic survey, current affairs as far as prelims is considered. And as I have said, whenever we study economic survey, always look this survey not in the context of an aspirant of an exam, but a person who is having some aspirations in life, so that we'll get many inputs, not only from the so-called exam perspective, but also a great perspective about how we have to modulate our life, how we have to have a vision for our life, and how we can substantially ensure that our life is going to have some bright career path. So this is the thing that I said, and this is the book or which can be read by everyone, not only by those who are having aspirations of exam, right? So today we are going to start with this first chapter of economic survey. So already I have given a brief introduction about economic survey, what is economic survey, who releases it, and at what period they will be giving it, and what are the major outlines of this, and what does this year survey says. And there are 13 chapters in this. I have given a preface of this where Mr. Anantha Nageshwaran has said that get out of my way is the ultimate theme of all the 13 chapters that we are going to discuss. So already I have said the chapter number 1, chapter number 5 are related to the economic growth potentials amidst the so-called global uncertainties, and chapter number 5 is going to discuss about something like how economy is going to perform in the upcoming days. This is what we have, and the remaining chapters are based on primary, secondary, tertiary sectors, followed by infrastructure investments, social sector initiatives regarding something called health, how healthcare has to be taken by the people, artificial intelligence, and then macroeconomic parameters such as the growth rate in the country, financial sector in the country, inflation in the country, external sector. More or less this was the consolidation from chapter number 2 to chapter number 13. So what about chapter number 1 that we are going to study? So chapter number 1 is a brief introduction about how Indian economy has performed in the last 1 year and how it is going to have an outline for the upcoming year. This was a quick summary that they have given as usual, as said in the preface, by the way. This chapter starts with what are the global uncertainties that was present, and then they will slowly take us to how India is situated in this global turmoil and how the economy of the globe has been changing post-COVID, and what was India's position at this point of time, be in the so-called micro sector analysis or macro sector analysis, how we are going to perform in the upcoming days. All these discussions was done in chapter 1. So in the preface itself, I have said whenever we want to study something, if you are an economic student or if you are a mathematical background student who has some interest in statistics or some interest in graphs, always reading something in terms of graphs is one thing which gives us more advantage. So inferring some input from graphical analysis is some bright point that we can have. One best thing that economic survey does every year is they are going to give for every paragraph or for every second paragraph, they will be giving what they are saying in a graphical motion. So we can understand these concepts very simply if we just look at what the graphs are saying. So this is an attempt where I will be discussing about how the economic survey deals with the first chapter and how the graphs have been underlined in this book altogether. So the first chapter that we are going to discuss today is how Indian economy is situated amidst the global uncertainties. So to start with, what are the global uncertainties that the economic survey says? According to the World Economic Outlook of World Economic Forum, WEF, in the last 2 years, if you see how the global economy is performing, particularly after COVID-19, the global economy started coming back to the pre-COVID levels, and it started performing somewhere at a growth rate of 3.3 to 3.4% on an year. This was the growth rate. And World Economic Forum also says that on an average, the globe is going to clock somewhere around 3.3 to 3.4% of GDP in the upcoming year. This was the first outline. So this clearly says that the world economy is going at a point of 3.3 to 3.4% in the upcoming days. Now, the second point that it speaks is, as we have discussed again, If you look at what are the things that has happened in 2024, few of the major democratic countries went for elections, be it the US, be it India, be it Indonesia. At the same time, if you look at the economy of US, among all the advanced economies, US is performing better. This was present in the last year and the same thing is expected this year. So US is far better compared to Europe. This is what the analysis of economic survey is. So when we come to Europe, there are some outliners here. In Europe, if you look at the structure of European countries, there are 2 or 3 countries which are majorly dependent on the so-called industries, whereas some countries are dependent on service sector. All the countries where service sector is dominant, in that countries, there was substantial growth rate in the last few years, whereas the countries which are dependent on the so-called manufacturing base or industrial base, they are struggling a bit due to dampened demand at the global level for industries. Particularly, look at Europe. You have 2 countries named as Germany, one of the greatest economies of European Union, and Austria. These are the 2 economies which are industrial giants of Europe. They have struggled a bit in the last few years due to lack of or decreased demand for industrial products. But when you look at the other countries, say for example United Kingdom, look at France, look at Spain, look at Italy, all these countries are majorly dependent on something like service sector. As a result, in Europe, we see there was a growth, but that growth was not substantial to that of US. There was a less growth. Even in this less growth, there were some differences between the service sector economies and industrial sector economies, where service sector economies are dominating. Why US has dominated the world? This is again because of the so-called dominated the advanced economies, by the way. This is due to the so-called it's a service base. Coming back to Asia, in Asia there are 2 economies that we have to always look at. One is China. One problem with China is after COVID-19 there was less demand, and China is the only country most probably which is going under deflationary pressures after COVID-19. We know what is deflation. Deflation is reduction in the demand of the products. Right. As a result, China is facing the demand. As a result, facing the loss of demand. Hence, what China did, it started exporting, and China has got somewhere around $1 trillion by exporting. That was positioned in that level. So the domestic demand of China is very weak, whereas the global demand of China is very, very high, and China is making a clear inroads into Europe and into USA thanks to Joe Biden's administration. But with the change of guard at USA, Donald Trump clearly said that we are imposing some sanctions or we are going to impose some tariffs on China. As a result, there might be some problem for China with USA, but they have clear inroads for Europe. As a result, China is going to sustain its economic growth in the upcoming days. When you look at Japan, Japan is also struggling, the second economy that we have to study in Asia, and it is also facing some challenges due to weak demand at the global level. So in this pretext, advanced economies have come out of the so-called pre-COVID levels, or they are clocking at pre-COVID levels, and this is something where India has to tackle at the global level. Now, when you come to the emerging markets of the world, that is the global south countries, these countries are under inflationary pressures, but majority of the countries, nonetheless, they have come out of the pandemic woes, and they are also performing decently well. So if you look at globe altogether, the global GDP is going to perform a bit better compared to the last few years after COVID-19. Second thing is the inflationary trends in the advanced economies have started coming down, and the monetary management of these countries started improving in the world. As a result, all these economies started performing beautifully in terms of monetary management thanks to US Federal Reserve's or Federal Bank strategies that they have adapted last year. Next one is, if you look at the so-called global shipping prices in the last few years have decreased substantially. But however, in the latest year, particularly the last year and last but 1 year, due to the so-called Russia-Ukraine war and particularly the so-called Israel and Hamas war that was happening in the Gulf, the global shipping prices have slowly increased due to the blockade of Suez Canal. Hence, Shipping industry is facing some challenges to connect to the Atlantic towards the Indian Ocean, from Indian Ocean back to the Pacific Ocean. There are some challenges due to the global uncertainties. So if you look at the globe, how it was situated for the upcoming year, the global economy is very dampened in manufacturing sector, whereas in the service sector there was a hope. However, the challenges were the global political turmoil that we are seeing between Russia and Ukraine, as well as Israel and Palestine. That is the two reasons, or that is the two things that we have to worry. The rest of the thing is, in majority of the countries, they are going for, Europe is going for energy transition, which is taking them huge cost, and there is lack of demand there. And USA, with the new president at help, we have to wait and watch how US is going to unveil its policy. With this caution, the economic survey says that Indian economy has to deal with these things in the upcoming year. So slowly from here, under this pretext of the globe, we have to observe India. We have to look at India in this lens. Let's start analyzing India from the lens of this global context. To start with, what economic survey says for India is, in the last financial year, that is still we are in the same financial year 2025, this financial year, economic survey expects a growth rate of 6.3%. And for the upcoming year, they are expecting that the growth rate will be somewhere around 6.3 to 6.8% or 6.9%. So this was the range that they have set, 6.3 to 6.8%. And last year, this financial year, they are going at 6.4%. This is the first thing that they said. And the second thing that they have said is the GDP of the country in real terms is substantially at the pre-COVID levels. That is some achievement that the government of India has got. And when you look at the national income contribution, if you calculate national income through expenditure method, we all know that national income is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where you have private investments, that is private expenditure. Next, private fixed capital formation, exports, imports, government spending. More or less everything is in the positive line in the last few years. As a result, that is going to continue in the upcoming years also. So under this lens, Government of India expects that the financial year 2026 may have a growth rate between 6.3 to 6.8%, which means it will be somewhere around the same sphere that we have, around 6.4%. If you look at the yesterday's Lok Sabha discussion, or 2 days before Lok Sabha's discussion, Mr. Kapil Sibal has said that whether Nirmala Sitharaman is going to have a plan or whether she doesn't have a plan, India is going to grow at 6%. What we want is, we want a growth rate of 10 to 12%. That is what the comment that Kapil Sibal has made in this regarding to this economic survey. That is another story, by the way. So this is one thing that we have to remember. Now coming to the other parameters of India. Agricultural sector, compared to the year 2024 financial year, 2025 financial year, there was substantial growth in agriculture, where the government of India has expected to grow at 3.8% this financial year, thanks to the good Kharif season. 2024, by the way, was an El Nino year. There was no rains. As a result, the total agricultural output has decreased in the financial year 2024, but in the year 2025, there is good amount of rainfall. Hence, the total agricultural output growth this year, this financial year, we are expecting at 3.8%. That is the next thing. So GDP is expected to go at 6.3 to 6.8%. Agriculture is expected to go at 3.8%. Coming to the industrial sector, they are expecting that the industries will go at 6.2%. Why industrial sector is not growing to that extent? Again, the same thing that we have discussed. As far as the purchases managers index of Europe is considered, they have declined. And our exports are going to get declined in this level as far as industries are considered. But there was a good hope for service sector, which may propel the economy to clock somewhere around 6.8 to 6.9% on realistic terms. And if it is going on extra things, then that is always a welcome thing, as said by our persons, that is Anant Rageshwaran. Next, coming to various fiscal parameters, what Nirmala Sitharaman and what economic survey has said is, if you substantially look at how the fiscal deficits have been decreasing, Government of India has increased the so-called capital expenditure year on year. As a result, the finances of the government are well within control. Fiscal deficits are controlled, regularly reducing. So is the revenue deficits. So that is one point where India has to take some breathing space. And when you come to the so-called inflation, inflation has been highly moderated, and we know that inflation is of two types. One is core inflation and the second one is head inflation. Core inflation is more or less stable, but due to the so-called global supply chain mismatch and due to the lack of rainfall in the year 2024, what we have seen is there has been persistently high inflation in the food items. As a result, the retail price inflation, that is consumer price inflation, has clocked up around 6% or higher than 6%, which is a bit higher than inflation target in our country, which is between 2 to 6% of the so-called the price levels. This is something as far as inflation is considered, and this year economic survey is quite optimistic due to good rates that our supply is going to maintain constant, and as a result inflation will be within the band of 2 to 6%. That is another hope that we have. Now when we come to the external sector carries exports of goods, exports of services, imports of goods and imports of services. Now economic survey clearly says that as usual exports of goods is quite less, and as a result there was current account deficit as far as goods is considered, but that was more or less balanced by export of services. Thereby the current account deficit was quietly decreased thanks to this export in services. Export in services has reached to the highest level, whereas exports in goods have struggled a bit. However, India is the world's largest country this year also to receive the remittances. Thanks to the remittances, the total current account component of our external sector balance of payments, it has been quite decreased. Though we have current account deficit, but that was substantially decreased. When it comes to the capital account segment, thanks to the foreign direct investments in the country and to the foreign portfolio investments along with the government securities that Government of India has issued recently, there has been substantial capital inflows, and due to these capital inflows, we have offset the current account deficit, and as a result balance of payment was surplus again in the last year. And with this balance of surplus, RBI has went with the so-called sterilization function, and they have increased the forex reserves. The total forex reserves as of November 2025 according to the data is somewhere around $630 billion, and it is going to cover almost 90% of India's foreign debt that we owe until this period of time, and it is also sufficient to cover a monthly import of almost 10 months. For 10 months we will be in a position to import. So external segment is also appearing quite bright. The only concern is in Europe there is a reduced demand. At the global level, there has been challenges of artificial intelligence. In the upcoming days, the same challenge might occur in India. Hence, exports may create some trouble. Hence, economic survey is cautioning that we have to create the local demand and we have to attract the foreign direct investments so that our export potential will be always maintained and the forex reserves will be in a substantial position. This was what export sector is considered. Then when you come to the financial sector, particularly the banking sector, survey is very, very optimistic about the banks, because if you look at the gross NPAs and net NPAs of the banks, it has been 12-year low. The gross NPAs of the banks have been substantially low. That shows that the asset quality of the banks have improved. The second thing is, if you look at the return on equities, return on assets of the banks, they have been positive in the last 1 year. And the CRAR, capital to risk weighted assets ratios of the banks have substantially increased in the last 1 year or 2 years. It was around 16%, which is a way or a top notch than, or we have increased this beyond Basel norms, prescriptions, right? So 16% was CRAR, and almost all the scheduled commercial banks in India has recorded profits in the last financial year. So if you look at the financial sector more or less is very stable and it is working quite good in the country. Coming to the so-called capital markets, particularly the so-called stock market, one problem that India has seen in the last 1 year is due to the increased interest rates in other countries and due to the so-called IPOs which was offered by majority of the MNCs in the world, the foreign investors have come very slow. In the first few months, they have come and they have invested in the so-called stock markets, but there was outflow of money in the foreign portfolio investments. So we have to be cautious at that level as far as stock market is considered. The survey has also said that Indians have to be very careful, because today we have been seeing that there has been substantial increase in the financialization, which is resulting in the asset to price bubbling. So we have to take care. If you are investing in stock markets, a survey is saying that be very careful and look at whether the asset prices are bubbled due to the financialization or whether this is an actual performance of the country. Otherwise, that is going to be a loss of value for the for the so-called investors. This is something what economic survey has clearly stated for all the people who are investing in the stock markets. Hence, there is some insight for stock markets candidates from this survey. When it comes to the insurance sector and pension sector, again, thanks to the so-called 100% FDI given in the insurance sector, economic survey hopes that this year the insurance business is going to expand. At the same time, thanks to the so-called the new pension scheme which was bought by the government of India, it is also going to create some good positive outlook as far as financial sector is considered. Hence, in the financial sectors, banks perform decently well. Stock markets, yes, there is something that is challenging. Particularly, we have to take care of it. Investments. Third one is insurance sector. It is quite good, and pension sector is also quite optimistic as far as this one is considered. Then come to the so-called employment opportunities. Survey is very optimistic about employment. What it says is according to the latest PLFS survey, Periodic Labour Force Participation Survey, which is given by the so-called National Statistical Sample Survey Office (NSSO) of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, the total unemployment rate in the country is 3.2%. So the formal employment has increased according to the survey, and the unemployment rate started decreasing to 3.2%, and the total workers population ratio in the country is 58.2%, which means among all the Indians today, almost 60% of the Indians are in the workforce or already in the working sector. However, the labor force participation ratio in the country is 60.1. So the difference, whatever we find, is the unemployment rate, by the way. So unemployment rate is 3.2%, which the government of India has to tackle. So this is about another thing that survey is saying. So in and all, inflation is very cooled down. It is going to be within the target of 2 to 6% this year. GDP started performing to the pre-COVID levels, somewhere around 6.3 to 6.8%. Agriculture sector is performing beautifully well with an output of 3.8%. Industrial sector output is going to be expected at 6.2%. And then every sector has seen the emergence from the so-called COVID-19, and we are going back with the trends of pre-COVID levels. That was another observation, except some service sectors, which was contact sectors like the so-called entertainment sector, hospitality sector, come to the so-called tourism, come to the so-called transport. Except these sectors, almost all the other sectors have substantially improved in the country. So if you look at this segment, the first chapter which is discussing, the first chapter discusses that amidst the global circumstances, whatever we are facing, Indian economy is positioned in such a level that we are going to substantially improve in this financial year. So the first chapter, which has given a summary of chapter number 2 to chapter number 13, this was just a summary of it, where it has quantified how India's economy is going to perform in the upcoming days. So this was what first chapter has discussed about the growth rate in the country and how Indian economy is positioned. So one thing that economic survey wants to say is, economic survey is again instilling that confidence, and again it is instilling that optimism in Indians, particularly in the youth of this country, not to lose the momentum. And government of India is going to reduce the so-called regulatory compliance, and it is going to boost the so-called economy by giving a free hand for the private people, for the so-called private individuals to come invest in the economy, thereby get the benefits of the government reforms, whatever it is doing. So in total, though economic slowdown has happened a bit in the global level due to global uncertainties such as climate change, artificial intelligence evolution, or geopolitical turmoil that we are seeing, despite of all this, economic survey is expecting that we are going to perform decently well in the upcoming days. This is what a quick summary of chapter number 1 is. However, what I will do is, I will just share the link that you have, or I will just show how the graphs are present, and then you can understand in clear, you can understand in detail what we are discussing about it. So this is a photograph I have given. So the major reason for giving this photograph is quite simple, ladies and gentlemen. So how Indian economy, or the elephant of India, economy of India is quantified as elephant which struggles to move, right? So if you look at Indian elephant amidst the global circumstances, we can expect that our economy is going to perform beautifully well in the upcoming days. So this elephant is moving up slow and slow, slow and slow, slow and slow. Despite the various global uncertainties, be it Japan, be it France, be it UK, be it Germany, be it any other country in the world, Canada or the so-called America, despite all these challenges that we have, Indian economy is performing beautifully well, or our elephant is going to be performing well. This is the summary. The entire first chapter summary is this one. State of the economy is getting back into the lane of faster growth. So our lane is faster lane, and that is chapter number 1 of this economic survey 2024 and 25. This is class number 2. So if you look at the state of Indian economy in this chapter, how they have discussed this by giving into 4 domains: introduction, global economic scenario, domestic economy remains steady amidst global uncertainties, and economy is characterized by stability and inclusivity on multiple fronts. This is what economic survey is saying. So in the introduction, what they have said is these things. Economic survey says that the global challenges are Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Hamas war, cyber attacks are increasing. Amidst this, the global economy has performed at 3.3% in the year 2024-25. And advanced economies, American economy is improving at a faster rate than European economy. And the manufacturing sector is performing a bit low compared to the service sector across the world. And the same thing is being visualized even in India. In India also, we are seeing some challenges as far as manufacturing sector is considered, and that the challenge is this one. So this is a challenge that we are facing. Global inflation is cooled down, and the prices are cumulative prices are still persisting in the country. So more or less, global inflation is cooled down, and that is one great sign for the world. Geopolitical uncertainties are the challenges that we have. So if you look at, as I said, you can understand this in the tabular format very quickly. No need to go through each and everything. Whatever I say, that is important. Otherwise, just you have to look at it. So economic outlook of the world, as said by the so-called OECD, world is growing at a rate of 3.2%. On an average, the world is going at 3.2% growth. According to IMF World Economic Outlook, if you look at this is important. World Economic Outlook of IMF. In the financial year 2025, the global world has performed at 3.3%. So 3.3, 3.2, 3.3%. So this financial year, the world is going to grow at 3.3%. And one important thing that we can observe is the advanced economies are growing at a phase of 1.9%, whereas the emerging market and developing countries, EMDC countries are called as emerging market and developing economies of the world, they are going at a phase of 4.2%. So what is the first thing that we have to observe here is the world is growing at 3.3. Developed countries of the world are growing at 1.9, whereas developing countries of the world are growing at 4.2. This is one positive sign for all the developing countries, be it India, be it China, be it African countries. So world is going at 3.3%, whereas advanced economies of global north are growing at 1.9. Emerging market and developing economies are growing at 4.2%. This is first thing that we can remember here as far as global economy is considered. As I said, German economy is struggling. Why? Germany is an industrialized country. Industrial sector has slowed down in the last financial year. So this is what German economy is, not important for us. Look at among the advanced economies, US economy is performing better than European economy. So if you look at blue color, this is USA, this is European Union. So US is performing far better than European Union. Hence, again, if you look at the global order, we can expect that among the advanced countries also, US is dominating the world in terms of economy even in this year. With Donald Trump at the helm of affairs, US is going to have a greater say in the politics. It is going to say further a greater say in economics also. So this is one thing. I said world is growing at 3.3, advanced economies at 1.9, Indian economies or the emerging economies are growing at 4.2. This is first observation. In Europe, Germany is struggling. Whereas in the advanced economies itself, US is at a higher rate, whereas compared to the so-called European Union. This is one thing that we can observe. Subsequently, the global manufacturing, how the global manufacturing sectors are present, how service sectors are present. So this was global manufacturing, purchases managers index. PMI means purchases managers index. We all know that this index carries a mark between 0 to 100. If it is above 50, it is an indication that the industry is going to expand or service sectors are going to expand. If it is below 50, that is contraction. So if you look at how the economy is performing, particularly from the so-called global manufacturing sector, manufacturing is struggling somewhere around 50%, 50 points, whereas service sector is somewhere around 54 or 53. So this is a clear indication that in the globe, manufacturing sector is struggling compared to the service sector. All the countries which are having service base, they are going to have a great phase in the upcoming years compared to the manufacturing countries. India being a service sector, we have an advantage here. That is the reason they gave. And if you look in detail of this manufacturing index and service index for both the countries, be it for the so-called advanced countries as well as emerging markets, purchases managers index for manufacturing. So on an average, the global manufacturing sector has decreased. In this, the highest manufacturing base that we see is Canada. So for Canada, they are performing better. This will not be asked. But look at the developing or emerging markets. In the emerging markets, one beauty that we can observe is when the purchases managers index in the manufacturing is around 50%, in the emerging markets, India is having somewhere around 56%. Hence, India is among all these indices, India is the one which is performing beautifully in purchases managers index of emerging economies as well as developed economies. This is one observation. So this is one positive that we can have as far as our sectors are considered, as far as our relationships are considered. Right. Next one. Inflation. If you look at the figures of inflation, inflation is more or less cooled down in all the countries and it is somewhere around 2 to 4% for all the advanced economies, and this is a great sign, by the way. So this indicates that majority of the countries have come out of the so-called global crisis, and this is a very good indication because all the prices of goods and commodities are going to decrease over a period of time. The moment prices are falling, then that is going to be an advantage for the entire world. But if you look at the inflation in emerging countries, so inflation in the emerging countries are varying substantially. In some countries like China, it is going with the deflation. Just now I said among all the countries, if there is one country which is going with the deflation, that is China. And look at inflation in India, more or less among the emerging countries, inflation in India is highest. So normally our band is 6 to 2, 4 plus or minus 2. And it has went a bit above in the last financial year. So this is one cause of concern for India. Right. So here and here. So even in inflation, India is at a higher phase. That is one thing that India has to worry. So what I said, growth rate of the world, growth rate of advanced economies, growth rate of emerging market economies, purchases managers index, manufacturing is suffering, service sector is good. Even if you come to the so-called purchases managers index in terms of advanced economies, It is very less compared to the emerging markets. In the emerging markets, manufacturing base is high for India, or not base. Purchases managers index is high for India. Coming to the inflation in the advanced economies has very dampened. It was very low. That is a good sign. But in the emerging markets, inflation is highly fluctuating, and India is the country which has highest amount of inflation among the emerging market economies. This is one thing that India is facing. So inflation data is given by OECD and Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in India. Look at the global shipping prices. Shipping prices are measured by three things. First one is Shanghai Index, Baltic Dry Index, and WCI Index. So this is important. So Shanghai Index, Baltic Dry Index, and WCI Global Index are the indices for shipping prices, previous year prelims question. Now if you look at this index, more or less the prices have increased substantially in the last year. The reason is the Russia-Ukraine war and Israel-Palestine war. But if you look at the Baltic Dry Index started showing decently well. Baltic Index means along the Mediterranean coast, that is in the Suez Canal, if you are traveling, what is the ship cost or what is the transportation cost in the Atlantic towards the Suez and towards Indian Ocean? This is where Baltic Dry Index will be given. Particularly the ships moving in the Mediterranean, for that it will be giving it. So more or less it is moderated, which was high at one point of time due to the peak stage of Israel-Palestina war. Now it was decreased. So again this was a great thing for the country or for the world. So global shipping prices have also been decreased. So this is what you can write. Global shipping prices have also decreased. So remember, what are those? Shanghai, Baltic, and WCA. Subsequently, what we have, if you look at the price of commodities, people will be purchasing different commodities, agricultural commodities, industrial commodities, energy commodities. So the total commodities in the country, prices have been a bit high across the globe, according to World Bank data, right? However, more or less the prices in each and every sector are going with the same flow, except energy sector. So if you look at the price movements, in the energy sector it was bit low. Compared to the last year. But in the agriculture sector, more or less it is same. And then in mines and minerals it is there. So commodity prices of agriculture, energy has decreased a bit compared to other things. What about the central bank's monetary policy rates? If you look at the central bank's monetary policy rates in advanced economies, in almost all the economies, particularly in Japan, the policy rates of the banks are very, very low. But if you look at USA, Europe, and UK, the policy rates started decreasing after September 24. This is an indication that inflation levels have substantially decreased. When you come to the policy rates of the emerging markets, Mexico has highest policy rates. You know what is policy rate, right? The repo rate and reverse repo rates. Particularly the repo rate is called policy rate. What is the thing that we observe in India? In India, if you observe, ever since March 2023, the policy rates has been kept at 6.25%, and it is continued until December 2024. In February, they have decreased, right? But more or less, they have continued the same thing. The policy rates are 6.5% since March 2023. So for almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 into 2, 18 months in India, the policy rates have been kept at 6.5%. Right. So if you do observe this, inflation has cooled here. Inflation is a bit high in the emerging markets, and that is what we have seen again. Going to the so-called the bond yields of the so-called emerging markets as well as advanced economies. Bond yield is the return that you are going to get on the bond that you possess. So the bonds yields of US and UK and the so-called European Union and other countries are a bit less. Bond yields are less compared to the so-called the bond yields of emerging markets. As a result, government securities of India was purchased due to the highest bond yield, and India got some loans from global market. This is one substantiation that you can have from this. And if you look at the world risk, geopolitical risks, the geopolitical risks are more or less high as per economic policy uncertainty. Policy uncertainty is high due to the uncertainties in the political risks of the country, and in the trade also the risk has been substantially increased. World trade uncertainties is elevated. This is what the world economics is. This is what the global economics is. So starting with the so-called, the world is growing at 3.3% for the entire countries, whereas 1.9% for the advanced economies, 4.2% for India. This is first one, emerging markets. Second one is in advanced economies, USA is performing better than European Union. USA is going to become or is still a key player at the global level. This is for those who are writing PSIR. The third one is global services sector is performing beautifully well compared to the so-called global manufacturing base, and this can be visualized in the purchasing managers index of the developing countries and emerging countries. Next one is inflation has cooled down in advanced economies where there is high. Subsequently, the monetary policy rates are very low in the advanced economies, but monetary policy rates are high in the developing economies. Global shipping prices have substantially reduced except this Shanghai index as well as WCA index. If you look at the so-called Baltic Dry index, it has been substantially reduced. Next is policy rates have decreased and sovereign bond yields have been very high in the emerging markets compared to the so-called advanced economies. As a result, government of India has bought some good amounts of loans. And geopolitical risks are very high in the last few years, particularly in the last 4 months or 5 months, due to the enhanced versions of the war and with the election of President Trump in USA. This is about the global economic scenario, the first one. The second one is under this pretext, what is domestic economic turmoil? What you can classify the domestic economic turmoil. This is what we have. This I will do as a part of class number 3. So under this pretext, so far what I said, advanced economies, growth rate is less compared to the emerging markets and developing economies. In advanced economies, US economy is performing better than European Union. Even here, emerging markets are growing at a high pace. In advanced economies, inflation is low. At the same time, if you look at policy rates have been substantially decreased. Here, manufacturing base is decreased compared to the service sector base. Under this pretext, even in emerging markets, if you see, inflation is a bit high. Policy rates are a bit high. Here also, manufacturing sector is weak than service sector. And then the global commodity prices, though inflation has decreased, the cumulative prices has increased, and we have global uncertainties. This is what the global economic scenario is. Under this pretext, what IMF says, the world is going to grow at 2.2% in 2023 and at 3.4% in 2024. This is what they have said, and shipping prices have substantially decreased. This is what they have said as far as this point is considered. Now under this line, we have to observe how Indian economy has performed or how Indian economy is situated to perform. So what I say is, until this point, you can consider how global economy is performing. Given this line, how Indian economy is performing, we have to watch. That I'll make as a part of next class. So that is going to be a continuation class of this. That will also be released today itself. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.